So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and honestly it hasn't been that long since I last showed TOL FALAS, but the guy who sent me the replay did message me on Discord asking me to do it, and I don't want to alienate the people that send me stuff to review, so here we are on TOL FALAS, and at the very least the composition of the two teams is pretty pleasing to behold, so at least we have that going for us. So we'll go through the army compositions now, because obviously TOL FALAS, everyone knows what TOL FALAS is all about. It's a very good map. It is maybe a little bit close to the time where I last used it for me to feel entirely comfortable with using it, but like I said, I don't want to put people off from sending me stuff by leaving it too long to actually do, so yeah, that's the situation that currently I'm in. So we've got Jake Word, who's going to be playing as Isengard, a full complement of Uruk-hai pikemen here on the front line, which again will be very useful if they are saved for the late game, because even though they do have good armour, if they're committed too early, especially with the factions that they're going to be facing off against, they will run into a lot of deadly ranged fire. Uruk-hai infantry, another good choice in this situation because they aren't overly expensive. They're not cheap either, though. They're sort of a nice middle ground, like slightly more expensive than the standard line infantry units that you'll see most factions use, which is a good indicator of their quality. Good armour, decent shields, and also good stats all around as well. A very solid centre to the Isengard army. We also have some Uruk-hai berserkers, which will see a good amount of use on this battle today. Obviously, again, as soon as their hit points are expended, they do have pretty woeful defensive values, both in terms of their armour and their melee defense, but while those hit points are still up, they will do a ton of armour-piercing damage to any unit that stands in their way. We also have the Nazkai, which are basically the same, only they have less of that weakness, but they are also more expensive and there are less of them in the unit. General's bodyguard tier unit, of course, so much better armour. That's really the main thing that separates them from the Uruk-hai berserkers. They also have better stats all around, but even so, among sort of the most expensive infantry units in the game, which the Nazkai can consider themselves a part of, they do still lack a bit of melee defense in those terms, but they are still one of the strongest units of armor-piercing infantry in the game, so they do have something to make up for that. Uruk-hai crossbowmen as well, of course, another very fine unit to bring in an attacking situation because their armour protects them from basic archers at the very least, and if they get into position, their stopping power can be incredibly useful for thinning out defensive ranks, as can the Lurtz hunting pack. Body-piercing ammunition is something which can be very devastating whether on the attack or the defence. The Lurtz hunting pack as well, as far as rangers go, they're a bodyguard tier ranger, which actually isn't as good for dealing damage as standard rangers, believe it or not. But they're also pretty damn good in melee, so if push comes to shove and we come down to just a few unit models at the end, then the Lurtz hunting pack could be the kind of unit which makes a difference both at range and in melee. A lot of half-orc spearguard as well, which aren't as common because most Isengard players, I think, tend to get their long, pointy stick type infantry units from the Uruk-hai pikemen and from the Dunlending clansmen over there. They're a pretty good sort of basic spear to have in your army, shield wall, and also all of the bells and whistles that spears usually come with, like an anti-cavalry bonus and decent mass. And some Dunland clansmen as well, which of course don't have the shield wall because they are a militia unit, but their anti-cavalry bonus is still very good because they are Dunlanders and spearmen together. Now moving on to the second attacking army, we have another force from Evil, played by Agalar Galudithon, playing as a Rhudaur. So Rhudaur, one of my personal favourites to play as, both aesthetically and mechanically. Dunman Spearmen at the front, so obviously very basic units. Unlike the Orc factions, the most basic units from the Evil Men factions are not free, but they're also slightly better than the kind of Orc Spears you'd expect for the same sort of tier, but also don't expect too much from them, like that's not saying much. Most units will be able to outperform stuff like Orc Fodder. Rhudaur clansmen as well, they don't have the armour upgrade, but they're still much better than the Dunman Spearmen in front of them. Better shields, better attack values as well. As far as spears goes, they may still have the Spear Malice, but they actually have a decent attack score. As well as being for Rhudaur's standards, a decently tanky unit in and amongst their army. Rhudaur swordsmen as well, pretty numerous for what they offer, but they're a very basic unit of line infantry indeed, as you'd expect from the Evil Men, to be quite frank. Again, don't expect miracles from them, but the numbers that they offer to your army are very, very useful. We have some Rhudaur marksmen, which in terms of archer quality are honestly not that good, but they do have a lot of ammunition, so if you don't deal with them, they can fire at you for a long time. So it's a bit of a conundrum for enemy forces to face. You don't really want to shoot the Rhudaur marksmen because they're quite cheap, but if you don't, they'll end up firing at your line for quite some time. Ettenmore's Troll Hunters are a very useful part of any Rhudaur army because they've got better armour than most of their brethren. But also, of course, as Rhudaur goes, javelins and axe throwers are the key to their success. The Attrition Troll Hunters are also spears in melee, so they're a very multifaceted unit, and so they're quite a common pick for Rhudaur for a very good reason. There's probably some hidden units in here, probably Trollshore axe throwers, maybe some Franadine Rangers as well if they have the money to bring them. Franadine Pikemen are a very useful unit. Unlike most pikes, of course, they've got those shields to help them against arrow fire, but also just in general they're a very effective pike unit in combat, and I believe they buff the morale of units around them in a similar way to the Wounds of Tir Gorthad and Numinous Gate Guards from the other two Arnorian factions. But of course the Witchraven Slavers, a very powerful General's Bodyguard unit in a similar way to the Nazkai, honestly. Multiple HP, armor piercing, which comes with all the advantages and disadvantages associated with that kind of unit. The Nazkai are probably slightly the superior unit overall, but the Witchraven Slavers are, I think, 100 florins cheaper as well. I think that's the case, but regardless, two very similar units. Ferodrum Javelins as well. Actually, again, armor-piercing shock troops in melee that are multiple HP, but obviously not quite as good as the Witchraven Slavers in front of them. But to offset that, of course, they're Javelin Men as well, so they'll be able to deal a lot of damage from range before pulling out those big spiked war clubs in melee. Moving along to the third attacking army, we have Roger That playing as Mordor. Orc Javelins, so cheap Javelins, not quite on the same level as the ones that we saw from Rhudaur, but in this sort of situation where cost efficiency for the attackers is key, they can be such a useful unit to have. Nazgul in and amongst the Orc fodder. The Nazgul, as long as they're used correctly like this and they're embedded into any kind of unit, even if it's just basic Orc fodder, they can be so difficult to dislodge from the Mordor front line, which is a real problem for anyone that comes up against them. A full complement of Orc archers on the front line. They will be vastly outgunned by the defenders that are on display today at range, but it's still important to have units like this to try and absorb ammunition and try and do a little bit of damage in return. Run on halberdiers as well, so their armor-piercing phalanx could also be quite useful, but much in the same way as the Uruk-hai pikemen, perhaps to an even greater extent because the Morannon armor is not quite as well made as the Uruk-hai armor. They're going to be the sort of thing which enemy archers are going to easily be able to destroy. Even more so in the case of the Orc Maulers, whose armour is even worse, and again, shock infantry, unshielded. But the AP could very well be useful as long as they're supported properly and as long as they get to the front line without getting shredded by arrow fire. Just in behind them, Morannon infantry once again. Nothing too special about them, certainly outperformed by the Uruk-hai that they're going to be fighting alongside today. More or similar to the Rhudaur swordsmen, honestly. Only with a little bit more of a focus around their armour rather than their attack, which honestly I prefer the way Rhudaur goes about things with regards to this kind of infantry unit, because honestly even with the heightened armour the Morannon infantry still doesn't stand up too well in melee, but there are enough of them that you can cover some of your more important units with them, which is their main focus. Olag-hai and Mountain Trolls for their troll contingent, very important obviously for Mordor to use those kinds of units well, in addition to the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, who could push through certain sections of the line. Certainly all three of the defending factions today are very quality centric, so we'll see if the Blackguard are able to make good on their mass. We've seen mass pushes fail quite often actually in 0.97. And finally the Temple Guard armor piercing arrows, so useful as well as being very strong in melee, and that's where the general is going to be today. Then moving on to the fourth army, we have the Orcs of the Misty Mountains played by Bloodbath McGrath, so much like Mordor, very much focused on their numbers, even more so though because they certainly don't have the high-end units that Mordor have access to. Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen is something they do have access to that Mordor don't though. The stopping power of crossbows can be so effective of course, and it's an advantage they share with their Orc brethren from Orthanc. So with them, Heavy Goblin Halberds and Spears, so going for the full complement of armor-piercing polearm units. The Halberdiers, of course, don't have the shield, and also out of phalanx, while they can still do more damage than the likes of Pikeman Halberdiers. Being out of phalanx does mean that they are exposed to their slightly lower stats, so it'll be interesting to see how Bloodbath decides to try and use them. White Uruk Fearmongers, pretty much the much stronger version of Halberds that the Misty Mountains have access to. Again, eventually, when they come, I'm not sure whether the White Uruk Fearmongers will be moving over to Dol Guldur, which will be a big loss for the Misty Mountains, honestly, because this is a very useful unit for them to have access to, in addition to some of the units over there. Black Uruks the Mountains, heavy swordsmen, obviously high damage, high defense. Heavy Goblin Infantry, which are trash, to be honest with you, but at least they can add numbers. Snow Trolls, very quick. Then back here, some Mountain Uruk Hosts, which, again, are another unit I expect to move to Dol Guldur when they are eventually sort of more fleshed out. But also, as far as line infantry goes, for their cost, they're very efficient, to be honest with you, which in this sort of situation, like I said, very, very important. Blackback Mountain Berserkers, very damaging, dual-wielding units, and some Cave Trolls as well. And then finally, for the attackers, We have Angmar played by Y2K86, so he's got some Trolls of Gundabad over here. We also have some Angmar Marauders, which again, very similar to the likes of the... Well, actually, no, I guess they are slightly worse, actually, than something like the Morannon Infantry and the Rhudaur Swordsmen. They're probably slightly stronger, to be honest with you, than the Heavy Goblin Infantry, but they're still not brilliant, if we're being honest. Blackwatch Legion, stronger, actually, as a mass-pushing unit than the Black Legion of Barad-dûr. They're certainly more capable of looking after themselves as a melee unit goes. But having said that, we've seen mass pushes fail with them pretty consistently in 0.97 as well, so we'll see if Angmar can make use of them. Gundabad Guard, very solid heavy spears, lots of Witch Realm, Angmar Halberdiers and Witch Realm Blackguard, and the rest of his army appears to be hidden, which would suggest a plentiful amount of Snaga and Goblins, which is an interesting way for Angmar to deploy. Usually we see them go very quality heavy. It looks as though Angmar might have gone numbers heavy this time around though, which is interesting, especially marching into the jaws of Lothlorien, as they are played by Yo Ranger 0123. He sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. Karen Amroth Rangers are waiting up here on this cliff to inevitably crash my game, I'm sure. Multiple HP, 6 missile damage in comparison to most human rangers, which have 5. Lorinand Archers up here on the cliff as well to give a bit of extra support. Not that the rangers need that. Lorinand Spears down here. It'll be interesting to see how well this front line holds up under consistent pressure from Angmar, and presumably the Misty Mountains will send over contingents as well. A second unit of Karen Amroth Rangers, so Yo Ranger certainly knows which side his bread is buttered. That's going to be a lot of damage for Angmar to have to deal with. I wonder why this player sent me this battle replay. Could it be that he ends up getting thousands and thousands of kills on his Karen Amroth Rangers? The cynic in me would say yes. Galatharin Blade Masters are back here as well with their armour upgrade. Kindred of Caliborn are also not quite as deadly as Rangers, but they sort of combine being very damaging at range with also a good amount of expertise in melee as well. Lorinand Axemen, Swordmasters and Watchers of the Golden Wood also, which is where Haldir is going to be hanging out, and the rest of his army is over here. Karas Galadhon's Guardians, Lorinand Warriors and some more Lorinand Spears as well. There's actually another unit over here, which is another unit of archers, unsurprising for Lothlorien, some Lorinand archers. Then we have Phils, who's going to be playing as Imladris. He's got some archers of Rivendell, which are very basic, especially without the armour upgrade, but to be fair, Imladris are much more about their upfront and personal approach than Lothlorien are, so it's not too surprising perhaps to note that he's probably gone a little bit more focused on his infantry. Sub-units of Imladris Guardians, they may not have the armour upgrade, but don't let that fool you, they're still going to be one of the strongest units of line infantry in the game even without that. An Elven Catapult. Excuse me. We have some Gwythi Arthand, some Eldrenway Swordmasters and some Gwythi Myrdain as well, so some of the more elite units that Imladris can field as far as their infantry goes. Armour piercing, shock troops, very high-end spears and bodyguard tier spears as well. Broinen River Wards, obviously very nice heavy swordsmen, the equivalent to which most Elven factions have. We also have some Eldrenway archers. Obviously the Eldrenway units are a cut above what most heavy Elven units are, but you generally can't field a ton of them as Imladris, so you do need to be a little bit careful. Swords of Rivendell, and then up here we have some Norotino warriors ready to rain some extra damage down on enemies that are going to come their way, and some Gwythi Rhudaur as well, so the High Elven Knights will be riding forth. It remains to be seen how effective they're going to be. And then finally we have actually some more Norotino warriors, but the final faction that's on the field today is in a massive big blob over here, ready to move to reinforce their allies. Stewed Balrog playing as my self-confessed least favourite faction in 0.97, the Dwarves of Erebor, and that all comes down to their contingent of crossbows and their Blacklock Engineers, which I'm sure are going to play a part in this battle, though to be fair I can't actually see the black horned helmets of the Blacklock, so maybe Stewed Balrog didn't bring them and we've just got the standard crossbows to wrestle with today. But there's a lot of pikes, a lot of spears, the Erebor Legionaries, the Ironfoot Hammer Guard, who will make a very nice foil actually to riding with the Gwythi Rhudaur. They may not be as quick, but they're no less damaging, to be honest with you. But yeah, there's actually some Obsidian Guard in there as well. You can see their golden accents on their armour poking out. A lot of Ironfoots. I can also see Axe Guard of Erebor here and there as well, some Ironfoot Axe Throwers as well. So I will make a cut, because generally speaking on TOL FALAS it takes the attackers a little while to get in position, although 33,000 frames is quite reasonable for TOL FALAS, so it may be that the attackers dispense with all the messing around and attack earlier. One can only hope, and this map doesn't result in a crash. I would certainly hope not, considering how adamant Yo Ranger was that I used this one. So yeah, I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the attackers are getting closer to the defences. So here we go, the attackers are now in range of some of the defending archers. The Rhudaur warriors of Fils starting to open up on the attackers as they move into position to try and take this hill. So this is sort of more textbook to how TOL FALAS sort of usually works out nowadays, where the defenders will try to concentrate their forces on this hill over here, because moving across bridges is such a pain in the arse that generally speaking the attackers will try to avoid it if they can, because you can only really send one unit across at a time, and doing that, as I've said before, in an offensive siege generally is a horrible idea. Yeah, it's not good, especially when you have to attack into the quality the likes of which the elves and the dwarves are able to commit to a defense like this. It can be suicidal to do that. So Aguilar is starting to take some damage from the Rhudaur warriors right now. You can see his Dunman Spearmen. There's also some Orc Archers from Roger that moving into place as well. It'll be interesting to see how the attackers decide to try and wear the defenders down over here. Meanwhile, over here, Cairn Amroth Rangers starting to fire now, interestingly enough. This unit of Snaga Archers has already been absolutely butchered, to be honest with you. And the Cairn Amroth Rangers continuing to fire at the Gundabad Guard. To be fair, they'll be slightly better at dealing with this sort of punishment than most units. Their armour for Orc standards is actually pretty decent, and they have large shields as well. But having said that, if you're taking a lot of body-piercing fire on a unit that's very heavily clustered together, you're going to take quite a few losses regardless. But they'll much rather take arrow fire in that manner than when their whole army is clustered together. Losing a single unit of Gundabad Guard in the grand scheme of things is not all that bad for Angmar. But Angmar will need some assistance. It does look as though they are going to get that as well. Having a look on this side of the river, the Orcs of the Misty Mountains are going to, it looks like, commit their full might behind Angmar over here, which I think is actually quite wise, because otherwise Angmar would easily be destroyed by Lothlorien in this choke point over here, mainly courtesy of their archers. But also the Misty Mountains going over to the other side, especially if the attackers intend to just bunch up over on this one choke point over here, which I would recommend having a few units stationed over here so that they could potentially move across the river if they have the chance via the bridges. But I feel as though the attackers are going to mostly sort of concentrate their efforts trying to take this hill over here. And that being the case, I do feel as though the Misty Mountains being over here would not really offer too much more for the attackers if there's only so much room to manoeuvre. And more Troll Hunters are going to move forward here, taking some damage here on their Dunman Spearmen and their Orc Archers in addition to their Troll Hunters here. But Troll Hunters moving forward first is an interesting move. I mean, they do have better armour than most Rhudaur units. They also have that shield value from carrying those shields on their back, but to be brutally honest with you, like, even if they're under this amount of fire from the front from elven arrows, I can't imagine they're going to enjoy this too much. I mean, they're holding up okay for now, but time will tell. They are in range now, though. Can they get a good volley off, though? They do manage to get a decent volley off, though, and this is going to be fairly important. I mean, they didn't kill many of those Eldarenway spearmen, but certainly an elven front line comprised of these Eldarenway units is going to be pretty damn difficult to wear down with units like Rhudaur swordsmen and Dunman spearmen. I can't imagine Mordor are going to be sending forward their best and brightest either. Orc Archers coming forward. Forward come the Gwaith Rhudaur, who are undoubtedly going to try and charge into the Orc Archers to thin the herd very quickly. But the Ettenwald's Troll Hunters are going to be able to get a volley off here, I think. Indeed they are. Right into the on-rushing Gwaith Rhudaur. Most of the initial charge was absorbed by the Orc Archers as well, so that means the spears of these men of Rhudaur are now going to be able to come down, and the Gwaith Rhudaur will have to retreat. Fortunately for them, the initial javelin volley did do a little bit of damage, but it wasn't as devastating as it could have been, and now more Rhudaur spearmen are on the way forward to prevent that sort of thing from happening again. Turning their backs to the javelins there, but no additional casualties suffered. Interestingly enough as well, down here on the lower ground we can see that these Rhudaur marksmen have already had a number done on them from the elven arrows up on the hill there. The Archers of Rivendell shooting down into the Rhudaur marksmen, and so far Rhudaur have had a pretty rough time of it, but that's to be expected from the faction that goes in first against a decently prepared Imladris defence. Mostly Imladris up on the hills with a bit of Erebor, but a large portion of Erebor's army is also down here preventing the bridges from being used openly. Still these Snaga Archers firing away, trying to do some damage to the Lothlorien spearmen. They're picking up the odd kill here and there, which maybe is better than they could be expected to do. But this is only because they're firing unopposed. I can understand the trepidation behind Lothlorien not wanting to waste ammunition on a unit like Snaga Archers, which has already been put through the ringer by the Cairn Amroth Rangers. Here come the Kindred of Celeborn, though. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe they're going to use some of the split shot ammunition on them, which would be maybe a little bit overkill. Another unit of Snaga Stalkers revealing themselves. Will the Kindred use any of their ammunition? I'm not sure they will. Eager and fresh, the Kindred of Calibor. Snaga Stalkers moving forward, but Snaga Stalkers, like, if they were to engage either of these two units in melee alone, they would get destroyed. So interesting to see the Misty Mountains mainly leading the way. That's perhaps to be expected considering their more numbers-focused approach, generally speaking. A counter-attack here from the Elves from Imladris, the Eldraenway Spearmen coming forwards and doing the business, although there are Nazgul on the front line moving up with the Orc fodder. So with the Nazgul, honestly, here, the Eldraenway Spearmen may be bitten off a little bit more than they can chew. One of the few units that Mordor have brought in melee which can take on the Eldraenway Spears, provided they have the backup and the meat shield here around them of the Orc fodder. The Atmor's Trollhunts are probably going to try and get a side volley onto the Eldraenway Spears, but they are being engaged by some of the Elven units. This unit of Eldraenway Spearmen, though, will very easily be able to defeat the Dunman Spearmen. Scarcely will you see a bigger quality gulf between two units of spears, and also forward come the Eldraenway Swordmasters. Didn't see them in the army composition, actually. Again, another unit of the Eldraenway Heavy Swordsmen in comparison to the Broin and Riverwards. The Broin and Riverwards, they're the kind of heavy Elven swordsmen which most of the other Elven factions have access to. The Swordmasters are a bit of an anomaly, though. None of the other Elven factions really have an equivalent unit. The Noldorin Blade Masters, you could argue, but they're higher up again. They're a bodyguard tier unit, whereas that's not really what the Eldraenway Swordmasters are. Defeat seems certain for them, though. They took a bit of damage from arrows on the approach, and also the Nazgul are nearby. This unit of Eldraenway Swordmasters Spearmen is getting completely overwhelmed. In addition to that, some of the Orcs, the Misty Mountains forces are over here. The Mountain Orc Berserkers adding their high base damage to the Nazgul now, and that's going to be a problem. Armor piercing can be useful against Imladris. They do pack on that armor, after all. This does somewhat backfire. You know, obviously the low melee defense of units like this can be a problem against Imladris, as much as the attack and armor piercing is nice to have. But in this situation, with the Javelins coming in support, the Nazgul and some high attack units on the front line, this counter-attack from Imladris maybe hasn't gone the way they would have wanted. That unit of Dunman Spearmen has been dealt with, but you want a lot more than just killing off a unit of Dunman Spears if you're going to be committing a full complement of Eldraenway to a front-line fight like this. Mountain Orc Berserkers are taking some pretty nasty volleys from the Elven Archers which are deployed on the hill, but Rhudaur Marksmen are there. Orc Javelins are the ones throwing their payloads into the Eldraenway, getting good value for money. The Elven Catapult is opening up now as well, getting some nice hits there onto the advancing Isengard army of Jackword. And Isengard, I think they're thinking about maybe moving across the bridges, maybe stretching the defenders a little bit. It probably won't go as well as he's expecting, I'm sure, but at the very least he will be occupying more of the forces deeper in the settlement meanwhile. Over here, a bit more of a full-blooded advance as well from the forces of evil, as the Snaga Stalkers and a lot of these heavy Goblin units are advancing forwards. But up against the Lorien units, the Spears and the Warriors, this is going to be pretty brutal for these very basic units. Obviously the really high attack of the Axemen, the rock-solid defense of the Spearmen, it's a very nice combination to have. And against these very low-quality units, it's going to be quite difficult for them. The Snaga Archers have revealed themselves, though, so Angmar's, perhaps their slightly more numbers-focused approach in comparison to what they normally do, may pay dividends here, because that's a lot of Snaga Archers. They may not have the best quality of ammunition, they might be quite inaccurate, but in the numbers they're in here, any kill they get against a faction like Lothlorien is going to be a very nice thing for them to have. In come the Karas Gladhorn's Guardian, so Yo Ranger not really messing around, but these multiple HP pikemen are still taking a bit of damage on the approach from those Snaga. But with a unit of pikes of this quality on the front line, this initial assault from Angmar and the Misty Mountains is well and truly going to be stopped in its tracks. Some Goblin infantry on the front line here as well, but they're taking losses at a rather alarming rate by their standards, I'm sure. Cave Trolls are also milling around, but I don't really see what the Cave Trolls can hope to accomplish. They'll take a lot of damage passing through the Lorien Warriors especially. And there are reinforcements nearby, actually some Dwarves as well. The Dwarven player playing the role of support here. Ironfoot Warriors coming forward, so some decent Dwarven plate-wearing line infantry. Meanwhile, over here, those Nazgul have really been helped by the units in support around them. Uruk-hai Crossbowmen are taking a ton of damage, though they've been committed maybe a bit prematurely, as they are always going to be one of the main targets for any archers that can get in range of them. Forward comes some Dunman Spearmen to try and offer a bit of a screen for them. We can see actually they are going to be moving across the bridge here. The Uruk-hai Pikemen have taken, I think, some losses on the other side of that. That was actually from archers up on the hill, I think, more so than archers nearby. Ironfoot crossbows are in place, though, to do some really nasty damage, potentially. Uruk-hai pikemen, they're going to try and get their pikes down, but they are going to be surrounded pretty quickly here, and this is the problem with moving across the bridges. Like, the nearest support is far away, but that's not the player's fault. It's just the way that bridges seem to work in Medieval 2, very janky indeed. And unfortunately for him, the Isengard player is going to pay the price for this unit of Uruk-hai pikemen, surrounded on both sides by a Dwarven line infantry, Ironfoot warriors and Erebor legionaries, so unfortunately for them, a unit which can be so useful in the late game in the Uruk-hai pikemen is going to be relatively easily finished off here by the Dwarven defenders that are here to welcome them. There are some Uruk-hai infantry on the way across, but even that's not going to be enough because Erebor legionaries are a line infantry unit of sufficient quality to defeat them one-on-one, so with support that's obviously going to be a very easy task indeed, especially with the crossbows. Like, even if they look like they're sending across too many units for the dwarves to handle, the crossbows will open up, and that, as they say, will be that. Forward come the Barrow Wights. They're nowhere near the sponge they used to be in 0.96, but they are still useful in those terms. So it will take the elves a little bit longer to get rid of them, but Dwarven support coming forward. But Lothlorien's front line, obviously, with the heightened level of damage that Lothlorien is able to deal in melee, they really are starting to chew their way through, although losing their bottle a little bit now, trying to pull off their axemen from the front line. Lorinand archers, they can't afford to send off too many of their units. Perhaps they're hoping that the dwarves will pick up some of the slack here and send in their pikes and warriors. Obviously the dwarven armour is a little bit better in this sort of situation. Lothlorien's armour is by no means poor, but it's certainly not on the level of the dwarves either. Lorinand archers up on the hill there. The dwarves knocking over the trolls knocking over their own helpers. Heavy goblin halberdiers. Let's see here. Well, the Barrow Wights are doing their thing, sort of glitching all over the place, which does mean they can sort of slip through the line, but fortunately for the defenders, the secondary Dwarven line means this isn't going to be too much of a problem. More support coming in on the front line, though. A pretty battered and bruised unit of heavy goblin halberds only, though. Nothing too much to be concerned about for Lothlorien at the moment. Their front line holding on very well, mainly due to their infantry, it must be said, so far. Nortino warriors continuing to fire so far. The Battle of Attrition continues over here, and just through sheer numbers, it's something you'd imagine the attackers should be able to keep up for some time. The Orc Javelins, though, getting a little bit too far ahead of themselves there and taking a crunching charge from the High Elven Knights there. Some nice free kills there. They will take maybe a few losses on the retreat as they turn their backs on the already firing archers. As the Orc Javelins try to retreat once more. Oh, no, they're going to go forward once again. That's bold. Perhaps this will be the lighting the touch paper of another counter-attack from the defenders. We shall see. The Orc Javelins are going to go point blank to try and shoot the Ironfoot warriors by the looks of things. Unless they're out of ammunition. They did, after all, presumably do all of that damage to the Elder Enway, and maybe they're out of ammo, so they're just being used as fodder on the front line in case of another counter-attack. In addition to the Dunman Spears, the Trollshire Axethrower is getting into position. This is a unit you can't really afford to just live and let be. They're going to try and shoot into the crossbows. Now, fortunately for the Ironfoot crossbows, their heavy armour and also their slight shield value will mitigate some of this damage, but the really high base damage of axe throwers means they're still going to take some pretty nasty losses, and like I said, one of the main things in favour of Erebor are their crossbows, so Shoot Balrog certainly can't afford to lose them in a careless fashion. He's also taking some arrow fire from down low from the depleted Rhudaur marksman. Another counter-attack from the elves here. Norotino warriors that are out of ammunition going up against Orc Javelins that are out of ammunition, but of course there's only going to be one victor in this case. The dual-wielding Norotino warriors with those daggers and hand axes, easily going to be able to deal with them, but with the Nazgul arriving on the scene, that flicks back the other way once again. The Norotino warriors will lose pretty heavily. More Dunman Spearmen advancing as well, so the Norotino are going to try and retreat, seeing these reinforcements head to the front line. Trollshaws moving forward. They're going to need more than just this unit of Ironfoot warriors to stop the advance of Nazgul surrounded by their fodder. Ironfoot warriors are all well and good, but there are levels to this, levels which the attackers can take advantage of. Meanwhile, over here, still, the front line fight continues, and still Lothlorien holding on, but their front line's looking a little bit less healthy than it looked at the start of this assault. Angmar Marauders join the front as well, but so far, the Barrow Wights are really the only remarkable unit that have been committed. And as a result, Lothlorien have probably filled their boots in terms of their kills. So I'm sure Yo Ranger can be quite pleased with that. With the Dwarven support over here as well. Heavy Goblin crossbows, they've taken a lot of damage, presumably from archers on the approach, but they are still in position now, and even with only 26 of them, they're still capable of dealing a significant amount of damage over time, which could be a real issue. Can't afford to allow the attackers any free kills when you're the defenders in a 5v3. But we'll see. They don't have the best of shots, to be fair, either, so the damage they deal won't even be significant, even by a unit of 26's standards. Lorien archers firing away at something, presumably the units that are coming across the bridge. Indeed it is. Not a particularly well thought out target though, to be honest with you. I can understand trying to thin out the herd as they cross the bridge, but Blackwatch Legion have got really thick armour and they've got massive shields from the front as well, so even strong elven archers like the Lorien archers, to be brutally honest, are not going to do an awful lot of damage to the Blackwatch Legion. It's exactly the sort of role they like to perform. Looks like the Snow Trolls are going to be committed as well, so that's an interesting committal. They're not quite as strong as something like the Trolls of Angmar or Gundabad in melee, but they're still the best sustained combat Trolls that the Misty Mountains have, and with the damage that Lothlorien have already sustained on the front line, maybe the Misty Mountains player thinks that this is all that will be required to tip this initial fight, at least, in favour of the attackers. In come the Cave Trolls as well, so a big committal, and the initial charge is going to yield some pretty decent damage, and already the elves taking losses, so yeah, that is going to be enough to tilt this fight. More trolls coming in, massive blob of trolls now, and the elves caught maybe a little bit off guard by that very aggressive move forward. Let's see here. Kindred of Calibor. Lorien Axemen moving forwards as well. Galatharan Blade Masters still back here. I mean, Lothlorien can set up another defence very nicely. I mean, the Dwarves have moved forward, but that initial bunch of Elven units, the Trolls are going to pull back now as well, so they've done a decent amount of damage. Now they're pulling back, and they have forced Erebor and Lothlorien into committing more of their units at the very least. Meanwhile, over here, a much more genuine assault underway as well. This initial front line of Ironfoot Warriors and Noraturno Warriors is going to be no match at all for this large committal. I mean, the Nazgul at its centre are the only unit of genuine quality, but there are genuine infantry units moving forward now in the Rhudaur Clansmen to help push through the gap, so not a particularly well constructed defence, I have to say. You can see over there, obviously, the Isengard forces were dealt with quite easily. God Helheim are firing away with their, technically speaking, their Silverthorns, even if they don't have the point blank hits from the catapult there, which actually having the desired effect, a massive amount of damage going in there. So I'd actually think Agalar did the right thing there. He's just unfortunate in many ways the catapult was able to get its ducks in a row quick enough to fire in there, because he was so close to pushing through, but in the end this could backfire a little bit here on the attackers. The attackers are pushing forward in massive quantities now though, so the defenders are going to need to answer this somehow. They've got a lot of units in reserve, but if they allow, no, the attackers have the momentum now just because they're pushing forward with so many units. Obviously Rhudaur sort of taking the lead, the Nazgul are here, more of Mordor's forces are pushing forward now as well. Trolls are coming in, mountain trolls, which will be a nice damage spike for them on the front line in addition to all the numbers they have here already. Imladris Guardians are of course easily going to be able to butcher Rhudaur Clansmen en masse, but again it's a question of numbers. Can they butcher them quickly enough? I can also see the Sons of Durin are in there as well, so they have committed forward some elite units here, the defenders, so they're going to need to back this up with more numbers. Gwythe the Arthand and Broinen River Wards moving forward, taking some hits from some Orc Javelins there, but these are the sort of hits they're going to need to take here. The defenders, they need to try and stem the tide here, because credit to the attackers here for committing forward so aggressively, but time will tell whether they can make it worthwhile. There's Rhudaur Axemen that have revealed themselves as well. That'll be some nice AP damage against both Imladris and the Dwarves as they continue to push in. Attenwolf's Troll Hunters moving in, more reinforcements, so yeah, they need more on the front line here because there's a big committal, but the longer they can keep them here, the longer the Elven Archers and the Catapult can do the damage necessary to make the attackers regret this. This is what you have to do as the defenders. You need to be prepared to stop this kind of aggressive push, and if you're in a position to do so, punish it. Now fortunately, because the Catapult is here, they will be able to do so, but they need to get better shots than that. And 2 shots wasted into the sea there. Witchrealm Enslavers, like really quality units are being committed forward here. The attackers also, to make this worth it, need to continue to commit now. They need to make this large push worth it. Meanwhile, over here, routing units through the line, routing through the settlement. But so far, not a great deal of movement over here. It looked as though those trolls were going to be a real issue. The Witches of Angmar are firing. We're here just in time to see the green trails of death come in to do some damage to the Ironfoot pikes there. But this defensive line continues to fight on. And honestly, you know, in spite of the damage that they have managed to do, the Misty Mountains and Angmar have not really been able to make any significant ground at all. The initial front line has remained exactly in the place that it was at the start, so ultimately it's all good for the defenders over here, but over here is a different matter entirely. This is a highly changeable situation here. That is the Blacklock Engineer, so they are on the field today. They don't have the best of shots, to be honest with you, but the damage they do is still going to be incredibly important as this very thin front line struggles to hold on. And part of the problem here is the attackers are able to back up their front line with appropriate supporting units from afar. Reforged javelins firing in, the axe throwers, what remains of the archers, the crossbows as well. So they may break through over here because of that, but also with the Misty Mountains sending over support units over here, I can't help but feel as though Lothlorien should be able to win fairly easily over on the other side as long as they just hold their ground. Over here it's a completely different matter though. Erebor are sending over more reinforcements from Erebor legionaries and the mighty dragon slayers of Ered Mithrin. Is that going to be enough, and are they going to arrive in time? Their stubby dwarven legs trying to carry them up the hill quickly, but as it turns out Gimli was lying about them being natural sprinters. Ironfoot axe throwers trying to get in position to fire, but the Rhudaur swordsmen tried to stop them. Fortunately for them, the Broinin river wards were there to block the advance, and of course, in a fight between two units, that is going to heavily favour the Imladris contingent. But you can see over here, even with, you know, it says victory still seems like a distinct possibility for the defenders, and that comes down to quality. If the attackers keep their nerve though and keep committing, they should be able to force this defence to buckle, but yeah, they are sending forward now. Like the Blackguard of Barad-dûr is the ideal unit now, because with this defence being as thin as it is, they need something to blow holes in the line, and the Great Shield units are exactly what is required. But there are reinforcements arriving now in pretty large numbers. That was a bit unfortunate. The only thing they hit there was a Dragon Slayer. Ironfoot warriors on the front line still fighting hard. The Troll officer falls. In go the Dragon Slayers, which is such a strong unit. Blackguard moving forward, Moran on halberds. More of the Troll Shore axe throwers throwing their payloads in. They're going to try and cross the bridge again. They could, because a lot of the Dwarven reinforcements have now been brought up. But the Ironfoot Wargoat chariots are over here, so a single unit crossing the bridge would probably meet their demise at the end of the Dwarven Boadiceas. Archers of Rivendell continuing to fire away, but I don't know about this. It's looking pretty... I mean, both sides have... This is pretty much make or break for both sides. Whoever comes out of this looking the better will probably go on to win the battle as a whole, because if the attackers come away from this with not an awful lot to show, then, you know, they've lost a lot of their manpower trying to get through here. But the Great Shield units are pushing through now. More reinforcements are going to be needed to keep this defensive line secure. Fortunately, the defenders do have that. Kindred of Caliban are going to shoot at point blank. The Imladris Guardians are going to patch up the hole that was appearing in the lines. They're going to fight alongside the Dragon Slayers. More of the defending archers as well, trying to shoot at the Adunheim Shadowbows. The Adunheim Shadowbows as well, so the attackers have got body-piercing projectiles on hand, ready to be used. Meanwhile, over here, has to be said that so far, still so good for the defenders. The Trolls are trying to come in to do the same thing as they did earlier, but it's going to be more difficult now with well, not swordmasters, warriors I should say, as well as the Obsidian Guard over here now, which, you know, those two units together, not ideal for Trolls to be fighting. And again, still, this defensive line hasn't really gone anywhere. Angmar over here hasn't had access to the complete Misty Mountains army, though, it must be said. So Angmar, they still have some halberds, they still have their Blackwatch Legion. Do they still have their Witchround Blackguard? There goes a general. I think that was Rhudaur's general, because the Ferodrum Javelins were in shot, which is not an uncommon place to see a Rhudaur general. I don't know if the Witchround Blackguard were committed earlier and they all died off. The Fearmongers were, and they're nearly all gone. Are they back over here? No, there they are. Okay, they're behind the halberds. So, you know, Angmar still have a force, but not going to be enough to kill Lothlorien. But at the very least, they need to stop Lothlorien from sending over significant reinforcements over to this side. But a big rout, in the absence of the Rhudaur general and more reinforcements heading across, it's looking pretty dicey. In come the Drake Broodlings, a very weird unit, it must be said. They're going to come in to try and force their way through as well, which they can do. Can they do the damage? The Gwaithir Myrdain are here. Can be very difficult to stop them from charging. Oh, there go the Kindred of Celeborn, shooting their split shots into more approaching infantry, Orc Maulers, Morannon infantry across the way. Reinforcements are needed because, like I said, the attackers, they're starting to peter out over here actually. Even with the Drake Broodlings over here, they need more infantry units to stoke the flames of this attack, to be honest with you. Otherwise, it may yet come to nothing. Another catapult shot there, trying to do the business. Gwaithir Rhudaur is still alive. Looks as though they are going to try and cross the river. Isengard trying to make something happen with some Uruk-hai infantry and some Uruk-hai pikemen. Credit to Jack Word for trying this, but he just doesn't have enough, and obviously they're moving quite slowly as well. And with the Ironfoot crossbows shooting in, it's going to be a foregone conclusion who wins this. The axe throwers are going to lose to the infantry. Interestingly enough, if Erebor continues to do nothing, which that's something at least for Isengard to hold on to, all is perhaps not lost. What's going on? I'm surprised the chariots haven't come in. I mean, they're shooting their crossbows. In comes some Loran-armed archers as well. There is that half-orc spear guard crossing the bridge as well. At the very least, it gives the defenders something to think about. Occupies a few more units, absorbs a bit more ammunition, but this is only useful, really, if the attackers can make this assault for the hill worthwhile. And so far, they haven't really. They got a fair distance with their Great Shield units before they petered out. Now in come the Olag-hai, more trolls, doing some more damage, but they need more infantry on the front line, which has been committed, to be fair. Heavy goblins and Dunlending clansmen, though. Is that going to be the level of quality required to finally break this defence? I somehow have my doubts. Meanwhile, over here as well, Frandaline pikemen continuing to take damage. And it's not surprising when you see the calibre of units they're up against. They're now sort of devoid of support and they're broken and fighting to the death. Surrounded by Broinin River Wards and Gwaithir Myrdain, and also I think the Blackbook Engineers may be out of ammunition now, committed to melee. Their melee stats are not brilliant, but they're still a multiple HP unit, so they're very difficult to kill off, even in melee such as they are. Heavy Goblin Infantry moving forward, and as soon as they're here, they're already wavering. Goes to show the level of quality that this unit really is, and already they're running for the hills without really contributing too much to this assault. It's definitely been a grisly battle over here, and so far I have to say the defenders are looking the better for it. And like I said, whoever won this fight, I think, was going to go on to potentially win this fight. So the defenders in the ascendancy here. Do the attackers still have the manpower to follow through on this? The Gwaithir Myrdain charging forward into the Orc Maulers, who are following the heavy Goblin Infantry in, but the Goblins were already routing by the time the Orc Shock Infantry arrived on the scene. And now they're having to face off against some of the strongest units that Imladris and Erebor have to offer, so it's not going to end well for them. Consolation kills only at this point. In come the Drake Broodlings, though, mowing through their own men. They're going to try and make something happen here. Interesting glitch where their charge bonus continues to persist in melee. If that actually happens here, it could be the sort of thing to turn this fight around, but if it doesn't, then they'll get ripped apart by the units they're trying to kill. And in come the Gwaithir Rhudaur as well. Kindred of Celeborn, using that split shot still. It's looking like over here, yeah, the Ironfoot crossbow is able to rout the Uruk-hai infantry, the half-orc spearguard also suffering the same fate. And over here, Lothlorien also winning, so yeah, I have to say, the defenders are looking pretty good on every front line they're fighting on now. I think the attackers are really starting to run out of steam. We'll see. We'll see if they still have an ace up their sleeve. Maybe the Witchers can be the great equaliser in this situation. They can definitely do a lot of damage to the onrushing elves here, as long as they actually fire their volley. I think they're going for the Obsidian Guard. Indeed they did. A lot of damage done to the Obsidian Guard there, but it was a rather scattered unit. They didn't kill them off entirely. Damage done, but maybe not telling damage. The Witchers have also been... well, they weren't quite caught in melee, actually. The Blackwatch Legion were on hand to help out. The Orc fellas are going to be able to surround this pocket of Lothlorien resistance, so... Angmar, at the very least, they're going to go down swinging here. if nothing else. Not exactly the strongest units when it comes to dealing melee damage though. But numbers and surrounding the unit should yield the appropriate results. Obsidian Guard coming in after their grilling at the hands of the Witchers. That surprises me, you know. I'm surprised the announcer isn't feeling a little bit more confident about the situation. I suppose there's still some units down here from Isengard, but that isn't going to be enough if they cross the bridges, to be honest with you. And I don't really see... I mean, the Drake Broodlings are still alive. Temple Guard are moving forward. This is pretty much the last wave of assault. There's still Isengard forces back there. You can tell the Isengard player is a little bit newer because his allies sorely need him to move in. He did move across the bridges, to be fair to him, but he needs to be a little bit more of an active part of this assault over here because his allies need him quite desperately, to be honest with you, because this, if Isengard doesn't move forward, this is going to be the final roll of the dice to try and take this hill. There are still some pretty strong units in here. The Blackback Mountain Berserkers are moving forward. The Mountaineer at Coast are a line infantry unit not to be taken too lightly, but they're still going up against the likes of the Gwaithí Myrdain. The Dragon Slayers, there's only 10 of them left, but they've done a really good job on the front line. The Kindred of Celeborn are still over here. The Dwarves still have reinforcements should they need to. Isengard once again are going to try and cross the bridges, so again at the very least they're doing something at least, so I can't criticise the Isengard player too heavily. Gwaithí Rhudaur moving in. Kindred of Celeborn out of ammunition presumably because they're now going to be committed to melee to try and stop this next attack. The Highborns of Erebor have also been sent in. A very strong unit as well. Rhun and Riverward starting to look a little bit worse for wear. Dunaim Shadowbows and Snaga Skirmishers trying to affect the fight from afar. How much will the attackers have left over when all is said and done there? Only time will tell. Axe Throwers. Reloading, it says. What are they going to fire at? Uruk-hai Berserkers? That wouldn't be a bad choice. Light armour. Or no armour, really. Watchers of the Golden Wood moving forward, so I think here Lothlorien is going to try and scour Angmar from the field, and the Witchround Blackguard going up against the Watchers of the Golden Wood. A real clash of the titans there, but elsewhere Angmar are looking very, very haggard indeed. Elder Council moving forward with the support of some Ironfoot crossbows. That'll be enough to defeat these scattered units of infantry. Haldir does die at the hands of the Blackguard, though, and to be fair, Blackguard are a dedicated melee unit. Watchers of the Golden Wood are not. Galathrun Blade Masters, victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Heavy Swordsmen for the Elves. Obsidian Guard. There's a lot of Galathrun Blade Masters, the final vestiges of the Blackwatch Legion being isolated and destroyed. Forward come the Ironfoot crossbows, maybe to try and lend a hand to the Watchers of the Golden Wood, as are the Keren Amroth Rangers. Pretty good in melee as well with their large elven blades. With all the support, the Watchers of the Golden Wood now will probably have a lot more success. But still, Lothlorien victorious. And they did send across reinforcements over here as well, let's not forget. The Chariot's still waiting. Keren Amroth Rangers that are over here. Victory seems certain for them. And there you can see the God Helym firing their ammunition into the Uruk-hai infantry. These Uruk-hai, they're trying to make something happen by crossing the bridges, but again, they're a little bit isolated. The quality of the elves and dwarves here should be more than enough to make sure they don't make any genuine inroads, but we'll see. Ironfoot Axe Throwers continuing to throw their payloads as well. The Uruk-hai Pikemen a good choice. Again, no shield value to be worried about, which does make an impact when you're talking about fighting Axe Throwers. Lorenan Swordmasters going up against Uruk-hai Berserkers, as well as some supporting infantry. To be fair, you'd expect Isengard to win that if there wasn't any range support coming in, but there are from crossbows, and the Axe Throwers I think could do so as well. Karas Galadhon's Guardians are also moving across. Can the attackers make something happen up here? No is the answer by the looks of things. It really was the final fling trying to go up here and trying to win the fight, but ultimately they're still being sent packing. There's more routing from the heavy goblin infantry. The less manpower they have on the front line, the rougher it's going to be for them. Heavy goblin halberds running from the front line, the heavy goblin units showing their quality here. Gwaithí Rhudaur trying to charge in, but they're not really going to achieve much of anything. Temple Guard and Drake Broodlings moving in, along with the Blackback Berserkers, really the units of genuine danger that the defenders still have to worry about, but in the end I don't think it's going to be enough. Even if the attackers did win up here, they're not going to have enough left when all is said and done to go down and deal with the rest of Lothlorien and Erebor. It's definitely been a bruising encounter for Imladris though. What's going on over here? The Ironfoot Hammer Guard have managed to wriggle free and they're now in the back lines, which is very bad news for the attackers because it means their final hope, really, in the shape of their body-piercing and armour-piercing projectile units, are going to be charged down by these goat-riding, warhammer-wielding dwarves. Well, that is the end of Angmar, and these few units over here will try and make their way to the other side of the battlefield to complete the defenders' victory. What remains here of Isengard as well, fighting to the death, which is not too surprising when you consider the kind of units they're facing off against. The fact that they're taking fire from the Ironfoot axe throwers in the background over there. The Nazkai are over here, but they've already taken a lot of damage, and just through sheer numbers, there is going to be nowhere near enough of them. Uruk-hai pikemen shaken. This unit of depleted axe throwers trying to finish them off. And they will be able to do that at the very least. In go the Loren-armed archers. Loren-armed swordmasters as well. Withy Rhudaur still charging around. Yeah, the victory is almost complete now. It's just going to be a case of hunting down the units which are not going to rout off of their own accord, like the Blackback Berserkers. There's also the Snaga Skirmishers there in the background, to be fair. Also, the rest of the Isengard army is now moving forward, but far too late to help his allies. And it's a shame, because if Isengard had sent forward a couple of units over here, that could have been the difference between them taking the hill. And in the end, they didn't. They didn't even make it into the settlement this time, the attackers, which is always a sign that something went wrong for them. And again, I think it's just a matter of coordination more so than anything else. Because Isengard wasn't doing nothing. He was trying to make something happen by going across the bridges, but obviously in Medieval 2, that's easier said than done. Angmar didn't have enough support from the Misty Mountains to be able to defeat a very high-quality Lothlorien defence. And like I said, decision making over on this side of the battlefield was such that all the defenders really needed to do was be prepared to commit a lot of units to a defence. Like, the attackers made a big push, which I agree with, but obviously then the onus is on the defenders to commit, which several times I've seen them not willing to do so, but this time they were, and that was the main difference here. The defenders doing what they had to, and ultimately they will leave this battle as the deserved victors. As the horns continue to blare, Temple Guard are still over here. The Highborns are going to stop them from firing at the very least, as the remainder of these forces continue to hunt down what's left of the Blackback Berserkers, only 2 of them remaining. The remainder of the Isengard army going to try and move forward, but they're also going to have their progress blocked by the Gwaithdy Myrdain and some supporting Ironfoot crossbowmen. Victory is a distinct possibility. You don't say. Let's see. Highborns of Erebor. Temple Guard as well. I mean, like, the Temple Guard are very strong in melee. Of all of the armour-piercing archers, they're probably the strongest in melee. But obviously they're not going to be able to fight their way out of this one. They might be able to kill the Dwarven General as a bit of a consolation prize for their team. We shall see. Some Godhelly moving in. They're a really strong unit of... well, a really strong archer unit in melee as well. Gone are the days of the Nolder Elder Nobles, however, when they were absolutely ridiculous. They're better than they were in 0.96, however, with that new projectile of theirs. Makes them a little bit more worthwhile. In come the Hammer Guard. A nice charge. Their armour piercing will crack through that Black Numenorian armour. Very large Dwarven Warhammers. Meanwhile, down over here the counter-attack continues. Karas Galadon's Guardians, Isengard pushing forward, the crossbows being engaged by the Gwaithdy Myrdain. Not an awful lot of strength left. I mean, the Lurtz Hunting Pack could do a lot of damage, but Half-Orc Spearguard are not going to be the heroes the attackers need in this situation. They will be sent in to die for the cause, but little else, I fear. Temple Guards still on their knees. There goes the what I would assume to be the Isengard general. What little remains over here, the Uruk-hai pikes running for the hills. The Nazkai, of course, were defeated over here, forming up over here, but there's little need to commit these units. I mean, the Watchers of the Golden Wood could come along, I suppose. But Isengard at this point, bottled up. I saw the Ironfoot Wargoat chariots munching through the Isengard general. Ooh, that's a lot of routing units as well, the Lurtz hunting pack. The final nail in the coffin here being delivered by the Ironfoot Wargoat chariots. And all that remains really is to finish off the Lurtz hunting pack, which I don't know if they're locked morale, but as a bodyguard tier unit they probably won't rout too easily. Although when army losses kick in, if you're not locked morale, generally your whole force will run away. Loranand archers, Snaga skirmishers being butchered by Lothlorien as they try to retreat, but yeah, it's the Lurtz hunting pack will be the last unit left standing. Yeah, they are shaken, so they're not locked morale. Still about 1,000 frames left though, which is surprising. That suggests they're not going to rout for a little while yet. As the Ironfoot Wargoat chariots pull through the line. Lurtz and his buddies, the only ones left standing, but not for much longer. Well, they're broken and fighting to the death, so they can't be the last ones left alive. Does that honour go to the Temple Guard? Nope, they fell some time ago. Must be something down here then. No, the Snaga are broken and fighting to the death, so what is it? There must be some sort of locked morale unit which is still on the field somewhere. Like with one unit model left alive or something. How bizarre. Doesn't appear to be an awful lot left. I mean, it might be the Snaga that are just fighting to the death, which would be weird, but there's only 15 of them as well. Albeit they don't actually seem to be taking any sort of damage from the units that are near them. So maybe it is them. I didn't think fighting to the death counted, I thought, because they're still routing. I suppose that the game takes into account there's always a chance that maybe they return from routing, but being reasonable, 10 Snaga skirmishers are never going to return from routing. Even if it looks like their team's going to win, a unit that's this low on numbers is never really going to make something happen. Well, that's going to be that. He has been run through. Can't have been them either. I'm sure we'll see players admitted defeat somewhere. No, there it was, the Snaga. Wild. Well, there we go. Defenders with a victory. I mean, they are pretty battered and bruised, as is to be expected in a fight as brutal as this. But again, it was always going to come down to who came out on top of that really large push. And in the end, that was the Defenders. The Defenders all had rather small armies, being the factions that they were. Really the only one. Like, Erebor is the one least quality focused of these three. And even they are much more focused around upper end units. Like, the Ironfoots are their most basic, but even they are obviously going to run you a lot more than the equivalent attacking units in this situation. So it's not too surprising to see low kill counts for the attackers here, especially for Isengard, who obviously knew a player clearly, not really familiar. Because again, if Isengard had committed to that big push as well, just a couple of units, even of just half-orc spearguard in shield wall and pushing, could have been the difference between victory and defeat here for the attackers, because all they needed to do was take the hill, the momentum would have been with them, and maybe then they could have carried that through, but in the end they weren't quite able to make that happen, unfortunately for them. As for the attackers, I think they did very well, to be honest with you. Identical kills for Erebor and Lothlorien, slightly more on Imladris, so again, it does actually go to show that I thought the Lothlorien player would have sent this one to me because of ridiculous kill counts on the two units of Rangers, which I suppose is still possible. We'll have a look in a moment. But this was much more decided actually by infantry power, and I think that especially from an Imladris perspective on that hill, they really did a very good job of just holding that line. It cost them quite dearly as well. There wasn't, I think Imladris of all the defending armies was the most heavily drained by the end of it, but they definitely gave as good as they got. Meanwhile, let's see what did the damage for Lothlorien. I imagine it's still archers. I mean, Karas Gladhon's Guardians 486, holding the line resolutely. The Rangers, one unit getting over 300, which is what you would expect, but the other one not quite so much, interestingly enough. Watchers of the Golden Wood, not a lot, but they did charge into melee and actually sort of use their swords to get their kills, and that was against Witchround Blackguard as well. Kindred of Celeborn did very well for themselves, and the Loranand units as well. So even Lothlorien, actually, more credit goes to their infantry on this occasion than their archers, which I think is good, because Lothlorien's infantry is very good. It's not quite as well-rounded, I would say, as Imladris is. Imladris, obviously, infantry power is, well, infantry and heavy cavalry power, I would say, is certainly their thing. But Lothlorien, you know, they do trade in a little bit of certainly their melee defense and their armor in comparison to Lothlorien, so that in comparison to Imladris, I should say. So Lothlorien's infantry is easier to kill than Imladris's. Having said that, it is also, on average, the equivalent units from Lothlorien are also slightly more damaging. So on this occasion, certainly against the lower tier units from Angmar and the Misty Mountains, they were able to really show their quality, which is good. And also Erebor as well, their infantry was also able to do that with especially the Dragon Slayers when they got committed. Obviously it was a big problem for the attackers trying to push through. The Ironfoot showed that they're a decent unit, the Erebor Legionaries as well. So time and time again I've really moaned about the Erebor crossbows, and I think I have good reason to have done so, but this at least shows that Erebor have a little bit more to them than their Ironfoot crossbows, which perhaps is why they are so strong, the fact that they have that really powerful tool, but they back that up with being classically strong in the way that the dwarves always have been, which I don't mind that so much. That's definitely something that you would expect from the dwarves. Attackers didn't do too much wrong. Obviously, newer player in Isengard could have made the difference there, but they didn't do too much wrong. They had the right idea. The execution just wasn't quite there for them to win the battle for me. But yeah, big thanks to Yo Ranger for sending me this battle replay. It was certainly a very good one. I just hope that people don't think it hasn't been too soon since I last showed TOL FALAS. It's a very good map anyway. Probably won't put TOL FALAS in the title though. Obviously want to be a little bit more thematically appropriate considering the Dwarf and Elven alliance that was going on here. At the very least it was also lore friendly, which I'm sure people will appreciate. But yeah, next I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I think I'll probably... Sin sent me a free-for-all which was between the Númenórean factions, which will be an interesting one to do. But I think I'll probably use the one that Rules sent me first and foremost, which is a battle between Linden and the dwarves. So someone did say that they hadn't seen Imladris in a while. Well, here are Imladris. Linden are another faction which people say they don't see an awful lot of these days, so it'd be nice to see Linden en masse once again. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.